Some people have been lied about, plotted against, and targeted by forces they couldn't even see. And yet, they're still standing. Every trap failed. Every attack dissolved. Every enemy who rose against them somehow fell on their own sword. That is not a coincidence. That is not luck. That is the hand of God, moving silently, powerfully, and personally over a life He has chosen to protect. And today, you're about to find out if that life is yours. Everything covered in this video is just the surface. The complete blueprint is inside the divine protocol. The link is in the description. Get it before this changes your life. Sign 1. Your enemy's plans continuously backfire against them. There is something deeply unsettling for the people who come against you, because no matter how carefully they plan, no matter how many allies they gather, no matter how much time they invest in your downfall, it never works. The trap they set becomes their own prison. The story they spread somehow circles back and exposes them. The opportunity they tried to steal from you ends up being the very thing that elevates you. And they cannot explain it, but you can. This is not a mystery. This is a pattern God established long before your enemies ever thought to move against you. In Isaiah 54 verse 17, He doesn't say, some weapons or most weapons. He says no weapon. That word carries the full weight of divine authority. It means every scheme, every accusation, every coordinated attack launched against a life that belongs to God is already disqualified before it lands. Not because you are perfect, not because you are powerful, but because God placed a boundary around you that human hands cannot move. Look at Joseph in Genesis. His brothers stripped him, sold him, and convinced themselves they had ended his story. But the very pit they threw him into became the beginning of his elevation. Potiphar's false accusations became the corridor that led him to Pharaoh's palace. Every weapon formed against Joseph didn't just fail, it served God's purpose. That is the nature of divine protection. It doesn't just block the attack, it redirects it into your advancement. Here is where conviction must settle in your spirit. If people have been working against you and their efforts keep collapsing, stop calling it karma. Stop calling it fate. Recognize it for what it is. God is actively, personally, and deliberately dismantling every structure built to harm you. He is not passive. He is not distant. He is fighting battles in rooms you will never enter, against forces you will never see. And so you can walk through this world without the weight of vengeance on your shoulders. You do not need to defend yourself against every voice, every rumor, every calculated move made in the dark, because the God who holds your future has already read the end of their plan, and it does not end in your defeat. It ends in your deliverance. Rest in that, walk in that, and watch what He does next. Sign 2. You survive situations that should have destroyed you. Think about the moments in your life that had no reasonable explanation for survival. The diagnosis that somehow reversed. The financial collapse that should have taken everything but left you standing. The relationship that imploded around you but didn't consume you. The season so dark and so heavy that people around you genuinely didn't know if you would make it through. And yet here you are. Not just surviving, breathing, moving, still in the fight. That is not your strength carrying you. That is something far greater operating on your behalf. Isaiah 43 verse 2 does not promise you that the fire won't come. Read it carefully. God says when you walk through the fire, not if. He already knew the fire was part of your journey. What He promised was that the flames would not define you, consume you, or finish you. The fire would touch you but never own you. And that distinction changes everything about how you understand the painful chapters of your story. Consider the 3 Hebrew men thrown into Nebuchadnezzar's furnace in Daniel chapter 3. The flames were so intense they killed the soldiers who threw them in. But when the king looked into that fire, he didn't see 3 men burning. He saw 4 men walking, unbound, untouched, and the 4th figure moving among them was unlike any man he had ever seen. God did not watch from a distance while His people burned. He walked into the fire with them. That is the God you serve. Not one who removes every trial, but one who enters every trial beside you. Here is where many people miss it. They look back at their hardest seasons with shame or confusion, wondering why God allowed it. But the fire was never meant to destroy you. It was designed to burn away everything that was holding you back from the person God called you to become. Every loss that didn't kill you was a refinement. Every storm you survived was a testimony being written in real time. The people who watched you go through it expected to attend your funeral. Instead, they witnessed your resurrection. And that quiet miracle, that unexplainable survival, is God's signature written across your life in a language the world cannot forge or fabricate. You didn't come this far by accident. You came this far because you are covered. Sign 3. God sends the right people into your life at the right time. There are people who showed up in your life at moments so precise, so perfectly timed, that logic cannot account for it. The stranger who spoke a word that pulled you back from the edge. The mentor who appeared exactly when your direction was lost. The friend who called you on the night you needed it most without knowing why they felt compelled to reach out. These moments feel like coincidence on the surface, but underneath them is the deliberate, calculated movement of a God who orchestrates human connections with surgical precision. Psalm 91 verse 11 reveals something most people read too quickly. God doesn't just passively watch over your life. He commands his angels concerning you. That word commands carries military authority. It means heaven is actively dispatched on your behalf. And sometimes that dispatch doesn't look like a supernatural vision or an audible voice. Sometimes it looks like a person walking through your door at exactly the right moment carrying exactly what you needed without either of you fully understanding why. Look at how God moved through people in Scripture. When Elijah collapsed in the wilderness, completely broken and asking God to take his life, God didn't send a sermon. He sent an angel who touched him, prepared food, and said the journey ahead requires strength. When Moses needed support, God gave him Aaron. When Ruth was left with nothing, God positioned Boaz. The pattern is consistent. God rarely works in isolation. He moves through people, through relationships, through timely arrivals that carry the fingerprint of divine arrangement. Here is the conviction that needs to land. Not every person God sends will arrive wearing obvious blessing. Some will come looking like a coworker, a neighbor, or even someone you almost dismissed. The danger is walking through life so closed off by past betrayal that you miss the messenger because you were too guarded to receive the message. God's protection includes the people he plants around you, and discernment is required to recognize them. But here is the grace in all of this. Even when you missed people he sent, even when past wounds made you slow to trust, God did not abandon the assignment. He rerouted. He resent. He remained committed to surrounding your life with what you needed because your protection was never dependent on your perfection. He guards you in all your ways, every road, every season, every step. If what you're hearing is shifting something inside you, the divine protocol goes 7 levels deeper. 7 biblical keys to master your soul and destiny. The link is in the description and pinned in the comments. Go get it. Sign 4. You have an unexplainable inner peace during storms. There is a specific kind of calm that has nothing to do with your circumstances being resolved. It is not the peace that comes after the storm passes. It is not the relief of a problem finally disappearing. It is something far more unusual. A stillness that exists inside the chaos. A quiet that holds you together while everything around you is falling apart. And the people watching you go through it cannot understand how you are still functioning, still breathing, still composed when by every reasonable measure you should be destroyed. That calm is not a personality trait. It is a divine signature. Philippians 4 verse 7 describes this peace as something that surpasses all understanding. Paul did not write those words from a comfortable room. He wrote them from a prison cell, chained, uncertain of his future, surrounded by the full weight of Roman authority pressing against him. And yet from that place he spoke of a peace so deep, so rooted, so completely beyond human logic that the mind itself cannot manufacture or explain it. That tells you something critical. This peace does not originate from your mind. It is deposited by God directly into your spirit, and it guards you from the inside out. Think about Jesus in the boat during the storm in Mark chapter 4. The waves were violent enough that seasoned fishermen were terrified. And Jesus was asleep, not in denial, not unaware, simply at rest in the middle of conditions that had broken the composure of everyone around him. That is the picture of what divine peace actually looks like. Not the absence of the storm, but the absence of panic within it. And when he woke and spoke to that storm, it obeyed. The peace he carried was not passive. It was authority resting in stillness. Here is where conviction must settle. If you have ever walked through a season that should have shattered your mind and found yourself strangely held together, do not dismiss that as emotional strength or personal resilience. God was guarding your mind when your mind had nothing left to give. He was standing at the door of your peace and refusing to let the storm enter what he had already claimed. That peace was never yours to produce. It was always his to give. And the fact that you are still mentally standing after everything that came against you is proof that he never stopped giving it. That is protection from the inside, and nothing the world sends can break what God himself is holding together. Sign 5, doors open for you that no man can shut. There are opportunities that arrived in your life with no logical explanation for why they chose you. Rooms you entered that your qualifications alone could not have unlocked. Connections that formed without strategy or networking. Promotions that bypassed people who had worked longer, positioned harder, and campaigned louder, and yet somehow landed on you. And in those moments, if you are honest, even you could not fully explain the mechanics of how it happened. That unexplainable access is not favoritism. It is not fortune. It is God personally escorting you through entrances that human authority has no power to block. Revelation 3 verse 8 was spoken to a church that had little strength by the world's standards. They were not the most powerful, the most influential, or the most resourced. But God looked at their faithfulness and said, I have placed before you an open door. Notice the sequence. God places the door first. Then he declares that no one can shut it. That means the opposition that comes after your opportunity is already operating outside its own authority. They can push against that door with everything they have and it will not move, because the one who opened it is still holding it. Joseph's story returns here with a different dimension. When Pharaoh looked at Joseph, a former prisoner, a Hebrew slave with no political standing, and handed him authority over all of Egypt, every natural law of social hierarchy was broken in a single moment. No committee approved it. No system endorsed it. God moved through Pharaoh's own mouth to open a door that an entire nation's worth of human gatekeepers could never have unlocked. That is what divine access looks like. It does not negotiate with the systems designed to exclude you. It overrides them entirely. Here is the conviction that must land with full weight. Every person who blocked your path, every door slammed in your face, every opportunity that was withheld through jealousy or politics or prejudice, was never the final word on your destiny. Men can close doors. Men can lock doors. Men can stand in front of doors with every intention of keeping you out. But they cannot shut what God has already declared open over your life. And here is the grace that carries you forward. You do not need to force doors, manipulate rooms, or exhaust yourself trying to be seen by the right people. Your assignment is faithfulness. God's assignment is access. When he decides your season of elevation has arrived, no gatekeeper on earth has the authority to tell him no. Walk forward. The door is already open. Sign 6. God gives you wisdom to detect evil before it reaches you. There have been moments where something inside you shifted before you had any evidence to justify it. A relationship that looked perfect on the surface, but something quiet and persistent told you to slow down. A business deal that checked every logical box but sat wrong in your spirit no matter how many times you reasoned through it. A person who smiled at you with their mouth while something deeper in you registered a warning you could not articulate. And later, sometimes much later, the truth surfaced and confirmed everything that inner signal was trying to tell you. That was not anxiety. That was not paranoia. That was God-given discernment operating as a shield around your life before the threat even announced itself. Proverbs 2 verse 6 establishes the source with absolute clarity. Wisdom does not come from experience alone, from education alone, or from human intuition refined over time. It comes from God's mouth. It is breathed out from heaven directly into the spirit of those who walk closely with him. And that wisdom carries a dimension that human intelligence simply cannot replicate. The ability to see beneath the surface of things, to read what is not being said, to sense what is being concealed behind carefully constructed appearances. Look at how Solomon operated in 1 Kings chapter 3. When two women stood before him both claiming the same child, there was no evidence, no witness, no legal document to resolve it. But the wisdom God had deposited in him cut through the surface of the dispute and exposed the truth in a single decisive moment. That is what divine wisdom does. It does not need every piece of information that human logic requires. It operates from a dimension of understanding that sees what eyes cannot and knows what reasoning cannot reach. Here is where conviction settles into something personal. Every time you pulled back from something that later proved dangerous, every time you chose not to trust someone who eventually revealed their true intentions, every time your spirit said no when your circumstances said yes, God was actively protecting you through the wisdom He placed inside you. That discernment was never accidental. It was cultivated through your relationship with Him and deployed precisely when your safety required it. And here is the grace that makes this sign deeply personal. God does not give this wisdom to the most educated or the most experienced. He gives it to those who ask, who seek, and who remain close enough to Him to hear what He is quietly saying beneath the noise of everything competing for their attention. Stay close to Him, and what is hidden in darkness will never catch you by surprise. Sign 7. No matter how many times you fall, you always rise again. There is a specific kind of person that evil cannot permanently defeat. Not because they never fall, not because they never fail, not because their life is free from collapse and contradiction, but because something inside them refuses to accept the ground as their final address. They have been down before. They have tasted humiliation, loss, and seasons so dark they questioned everything they believed about themselves and about God. And yet somehow, impossibly, they found themselves standing again. Not through sheer willpower, not through motivational discipline, but through a rising that came from somewhere deeper than their own strength could ever reach. Proverbs 24 verse 16 is one of the most quietly devastating verses in all of Scripture. Not because of what it says about falling, but because of what it says about the enemy watching you fall. The verse continues by saying the wicked are brought down by calamity. The contrast is deliberately placed. The righteous fall and rise. The wicked fall and stay down. That single distinction reveals something profound about divine protection. God does not promise His people a fall-free life. He promises them a fall-proof spirit. The rising is built into the identity of those who belong to Him. Look at Peter, the disciple who denied Jesus 3 times on the worst night in human history. By every measure of spiritual failure, Peter should have disqualified himself permanently. But Jesus did not write Peter's story from his lowest moment. He met him after the resurrection and restored him completely, then entrusted him with the very foundation of the early church. The fall was real. The shame was real. But it was not the final chapter because God never authors endings from moments of failure. He authors them from moments of restoration. Here is where conviction must hit with full force. Your enemy has studied your falls carefully. He has cataloged every collapse, every relapse, every moment you were face down in the dirt of your own mistakes. And he has built his entire strategy around keeping you convinced that this time, you will not get back up. That this fall is different. That this failure is finally the one that finishes you. That is the lie he needs you to believe because the moment you rise again, his entire plan collapses with it. And here is the grace that closes this sign with the weight it deserves. Every time you rose from something that should have finished you, heaven marked it. Not as luck, not as resilience, as testimony, as proof that the God who holds your life does not release His grip when you stumble. He tightens it. He lifts you. He dusts you off and points you forward again because your story was never written to end in the dirt. You will rise. You always do. And that is the most terrifying truth your enemies will ever have to face. There is something that needs to be said before this ends, and it needs to land with the full weight it carries. Everything you just witnessed across these 7 signs was never meant to be a checklist. It was never meant to be a theological exercise or a collection of interesting biblical observations. It was meant to be a mirror, a moment where you looked at your own life, the survival, the rising, the open doors, the peace that held you together when nothing else could, and finally called it what it actually is. Evidence. Proof. The unmistakable fingerprint of a God who has been personally, actively, and deliberately covering your life long before you ever thought to ask him to. The enemy has spent considerable energy trying to convince you that you are alone in this, that the falls mean abandonment, that the silence means absence, that the difficulty means disapproval. But every sign covered today dismantles that lie from its foundation. You are not surviving by accident. You are not rising by coincidence. You are not walking through open doors because of your own cleverness or timing. You are covered. You are guarded. And the God who commanded angels concerning your life has not rescinded that order for a single moment of your existence. Carry that truth into every room you enter from this day forward. Let it change the way you respond to opposition. Let it silence the voice that tells you the next fall will be the final one. Let it give you the kind of unmovable confidence that comes not from perfect circumstances but from knowing exactly whose hands are holding your life together. Now, if this message stirred something real inside you and you are ready to go beyond the surface, the Divine Protocol, 7 Biblical Keys to Master Your Soul and Destiny was written for exactly this moment in your life. 7 keys, 7 biblical depths, a complete roadmap for mastering your soul and stepping fully into the destiny God designed for you before you drew your first breath. The link is in the description and pinned in the comments. Your next level is one decision away. Go get it.